What's up, guys? It's Matt Vogt, and it's so great to be back with you all here on the Lifestyle Practice Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of a practice acquisition. It's very common that I begin working with clients during the practice evaluation phase. And to be honest, there are so many pitfalls and so much potential funny business that can go on in the practice evaluation phase. Oftentimes, sellers and brokers may paint a pretty rosy picture of a practice that's for sale that once you dive in, things don't seem so rosy after all. If you're thinking about buying a practice or you have your eye on one right now, you might feel pressure to just jump in, which is honestly kind of a good thing. I want you to feel that a little bit of that pressure. I want you to feel that hustle to become an owner versus just sticking in your comfort zone as an associate. But trust me, buying the wrong practice can kill your momentum, it can kill your mindset, and it can kill your bank account if you're not careful. In this episode, I'll help you break down what really matters in a practice deal, some red flags that I've run across with my own clients and that I see that are pretty common in the industry. And we'll talk about when you should just say thanks, but no thanks and run the other way. Now, you all know what my partners, Derek, Steve, and I do here at TLP. We help dentists just like you elevate your lives and careers through practice ownership. Before we jump into this episode, if you're someone who's looking to take your practice to the next level, head on over to our website, thelifestylepractice.com, and fill out our free practice and lifestyle assessment survey. It'll really make you think about a few things and get some info out there about what you're looking to accomplish, really. And Derek, Steve, or I will get back to you with some personalized insight and to start a conversation about what you're looking to accomplish. All right, let's dive in. So we'll go over a few red flags here today that I want you all to be aware of when evaluating or looking for a potential dental practice to buy. Now, I want to be clear before we jump into this. Mentioning red and things that we should be avoiding when looking for a practice sale does not mean we've got to be looking for the most perfect practice in the world to buy, and that anything that's wrong with the practice would make it a practice that we don't want to purchase. That's not true at all. What I'm trying to say here in this episode today is we've got to avoid these massive pitfalls or these potential massive pitfalls in an acquisition. We actually would love to find a dental practice with some things that aren't so perfect that we think we can improve on very quickly after we acquire it to up production and make it a more successful practice. That would mean we're getting good value on what we're paying for a practice, and we're able to make the most of that acquisition. So again, I just to be clear, it's okay, and in fact, I'd encourage you all to look for practices that aren't perfect, that aren't producing millions and millions and millions of dollars. Like, that's okay. We can find practices with potential that don't have these pretty large red flags that we'll go through here in this episode. Hope that makes sense. So red flag number one on our list here is when someone is selling a practice and advertising that, quote, having potential is a positive thing. I can't tell you how many listings I've come across where a practice has been declining over the years, and it's usually a pretty common story. A dentist is really getting up there in age. Maybe their skills are going away, and they're really slowing down, underdiagnosing. Staff are leaving and not being replaced, and we just see this thing going on a downward trend for years. And oftentimes, these practices are producing, I don't know, low six figures. And in those listings, they're listed as having potential. Maybe that's potential to grow back to where they were again. I don't know what that means in this scenario. But a lot of the time, I feel like that's a way of sugarcoating the truth, which is this practice is declining and has been declining for a long time. What I tend to see when that phrase gets thrown around is oftentimes the asking price for a practice like this is just too high. When a practice is in that range, that low six-figure range, oftentimes the mindset when we're potentially buying a practice like that shifts to treating it almost as a startup dental practice versus an acquisition. I mean, nowadays, if let's say a practice is doing $300,000 or $400,000 a year, that practice is so small that in essence you're evaluating the equipment, the space, what few patients are there, and you're seeing what that is actually worth. But oftentimes you've got to treat this as a startup. And how do I grow this practice to where it needs to be to support the the lifestyle of an average dentist. Practices like this are, I'm not sure why a dentist would be staying in a practice like this, because they're going to be making much less than they would as a decently producing associate. There's just so many creepy crawlies and heebie-jeebies that I get here when I think of a practice like this. There are some cases where a declining or smaller practice has good bones, if you want to call it that, where we feel confident that with the right systems and the right tweaks, we can very quickly grow that practice, and those can become great success stories. But there comes a point at which a practice is just too small. It's just been declining too much, where the amount of effort and the amount of work it's going to take to grow that practice is just not worth it, in my opinion. I'd rather someone find a slightly larger practice that's not as much of a failure, or if they have the right mindset and the right personality and have the right location in mind, to go start a practice. It tends to work out a ton better than just getting stuck with something like this, a major fixer upper. So be on the lookout if you see a listing, or a potential practice for sale that's listed as having potential. It's just, sometimes I guess that could be true, but more often than not, I see there being a lot of issues with practices like that. Red flag number 2 to talk about today: inconsistencies in really anything in the practice, staffing, production, or other recent major changes that could affect the value or the operations of the practice. Really common ones here: major staffing changes, whether that's with doctors, associates, team members, just constant turnover, things to look out for. Insurance participation changes are a big one as well. And then just fluctuations in production that don't really seem to have an explanation. I was advising a client recently on a potential practice acquisition, and initially there were some green flags to this potential practice. It was associate driven. The overhead was pretty low. The staffing was pretty consistent. And when I mentioned that an associate driven practice was a positive, it meant that if this practice were to be sold and the potential purchaser were to step in and replace this associate, there would be less potential for a dip in production or a loss of patients. Because in my mind, if we're trying to replace a owner dentist who's been there for 30 years and has formed these amazing relationships with all of his patients, that's going to be more difficult than going in and replacing an associate who may have been there for, who knows, a year or two, or there may have been multiple associates in the history of that practice. It's a lot easier to replace the dentist in that scenario. So there were some initial good things about this practice, but then we started to uncover a few things that made us uncomfortable. We learned that they had recently dropped a number of insurances in the practice. And in fact, we're just in network with Delta and no other insurances. This was within the last 4 months or so. We also learned that the associate who had been there for some period of time had just left in that period as well, about 3-4 months ago, and they had been piecing together. This was a practice that was a part of a slightly larger organization. They had been piecing together the dentistry that needed to be done in that practice by grabbing associates and grabbing the owner doc for days here and there. They were doing a similar thing with their hygienists. Tons of part-timers and temps just coming into work this practice. And so once we uncovered this information, obviously these are red flags in this scenario, and even an even bigger red flag that they weren't really disclosed at the start of the fact finding for this practice. So the real issue, and the reason that we walked away from this potential practice, was that the asking price was not reflecting all of these recent changes. If you were to run into a practice with the same exact scenario and the seller was willing to dip way down on their asking price and really just, sell you that practice for what it's worth, taking into account all of these inconsistencies and recent changes, sure, maybe you might make the leap on that practice and you would understand what you're getting yourself into. But in this case, the seller and the broker were trying to get an asking price for this practice as if none of these changes had happened recently. They were evaluating the last 2-3 years of production, which were consistent until these events. They were trying to utilize those as the basis for a very high asking price for this practice, and didn't seem to be really willing to budge or willing to even accept that these changes were going to affect the asking price of the practice. They're gonna, they're going to create more unknown for a potential purchaser. And when you're purchasing a practice, you have to know what you're getting yourself into. That's one of the main things you are buying when you purchase a dental practice. So we walked away. Red flag number 3, this is pretty black and white, is messiness or inconsistencies with the financials of the practice or any dishonesty in the profit and loss statement of the practice. Now, whenever you are evaluating a dental practice, you'll ideally want to have a team of people working for you, including a good accountant and a good lawyer. And it doesn't take an accountant or a lawyer experienced with practice transitions to smell when there's some funny business going on with the financials of a practice just by looking at a profit and loss statement. A couple of red flags for me that give me pause are when I see an owner dentist just running a ton of personal expenses through the business, where we see that on the the financials that are given to us when we're evaluating a practice, and we are not including those as business expenses, obviously, but it's a red flag. If you are not being honest about this, then what else are you being dishonest about when selling your practice, or what else is going on underneath the hood that we aren't sure of? And another really easy one is when there just seems to be difficulty in acquiring the information that we want financially about the practice. It might be past tax returns, past profit and loss statements for years going back, reports on the number of active patients, how many patients have which insurance plan, level of production based on insurance plan. I mean, these are just reports coming off the top of my head that I'd want to see for all these practices, and so many, or a good number of them, either refuse to run these reports, provide a great amount of difficulty in doing so, or just aren't organized enough to be able to provide that information. And so again, if you run into some of these red flags, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't purchase the practice, but the asking price and what you're paying needs to reflect the amount of risk that you're taking on by potentially acquiring a practice that might have some skeletons in the closet. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but we're not going to just take that risk without uh, factoring it in to how much the practice costs. Red flag number 4, final red flag to discuss today, is you feel any pressure or major urgency from the seller or the broker. It is very common for you to feel pressured or to feel urgency to purchase a practice. And quite honestly, sellers and brokers know it. It's very common for you to feel burnt out looking at however many crappy practices and finally coming across something that might be worth your while. Sellers and brokers can sense that, and they know it. They know what you're feeling. And so you never want to feel or express any sort of urgency or feel pressured in making a purchase. You want to be negotiating or evaluating from a place of power. And the ultimate place of power in any negotiation or any purchase of anything is the ability to walk away. And that's why I encourage all of my clients when we're in these scenarios to be very neutral in their interactions with potential sellers. So not overly positive, not overly negative, just a kind, professional, neutral tone, and never buying into any sort of narrative on why a practice has to sell quickly, or that there may be potential competing offers or other people evaluating the practice that we're looking at. Nope, we're not going to buy into that. We're going to remain neutral. We're going to remove any sort of urgency from our mindset that might be clouding our judgment, and evaluating each scenario from a very grounded mindset. I mean, it happens all the time. I mean, legitimately all the time. And I don't want this to sound like I'm poo-pooing on all sellers and brokers, but it's so common where there's some sort of story and that we have to get a deal moving or have to get a deal done quickly. Something's got to happen. Again, there's a million different examples I could give you. And oftentimes, if we were to succumb to those wishes from the the seller and the broker on the other side, that would mean cutting corners, not speaking with a lawyer, not asking the right questions, not running the right reports, and that is not the right position to be in when you're evaluating a massive purchase like acquiring a business. And this is one of my favorite, hats to put on when working with a client, because I care immensely about everyone that I work with, and I love getting in the weeds on this stuff. But I know that having someone on your side, or a team of people on your side, who can react unemotionally to decisions that are very, very emotional for you, if you're making it yourself, that's a superpower. That is one of the best things you can have, is people on your side who can advise you with a level head. And it's amazing when when deadlines are set or urgency gets put in place, and you say, you know what, I understand if you have to move at your pace, but I have to move at my pace to make sure this is right for me. So if you do need to sell this practice to someone else, or if you do need to move at that pace, I understand, and I thank you for the time. It's amazing what'll happen. uh, Somehow magically that practice will still be available once you do your homework. It's like buying a car, right? Somehow magically, if you walk away and you walk out of the dealership, you get a phone call the next day saying, "Hey, why don't we talk more about that offer you presented?" It's amazing how often that happens. So there should never be any sort of pressure that's affecting or clouding your judgment when evaluating a practice. Again, I'm excited when someone is urgently looking to buy a practice, and I know a lot of you all fall into that category. You're pushing yourselves to become owners, which is great. But then we've got to also evaluate from a neutral mindset, and not let that sense of urgency that you have affect the actual process of purchasing the practice. So we talked about red flags, but what are green flags here? And I would say the green flags, the things to look out for in a practice acquisition, that make me think it could be a great opportunity, are minor issues with the practice that you think you can correct. And by correcting those, grow the practice, or make it better, or make it whatever you want it to be, to align with your goals. And opportunities for growth or improvement by making small tweaks, not wholesale changes, not totally changing the culture of the practice, not totally ripping things down to the studs and rebuilding them back again. And ultimately, a potential practice purchase has to just align with your goals. There are a million different ways to practice dentistry. There are, every single practice is unique. And so what you are looking to accomplish with your dental practice acquisition, and your vision for your career and your life, those things have to mesh very, very well together. There is not a cookie cutter approach to purchasing a practice, because everyone's scenario in their career and their personal life is going to be unique. And that's one of the things I love about being a coach, is you get to know people on a very, very deep level. And honestly, you get them to know themselves on that level as well. And once you start to uncover like what the ultimate goal is together, light bulbs start to go off, and progress starts to be made that just wouldn't have been made otherwise. It's really neat to see, honestly. All right, so that's all for today's episode. I hope this brought you some insight. I hope it gets you thinking. If you're in this position where you're looking to purchase a practice, or you're in the heart of it right now, again, helping dentists like you all with these massive decisions is what I do. It's what we do here at TLP. So if you're ready to have a conversation, if you need some direction on this huge decision that you're looking at, email me, matt@thelifestylepractice.com, or visit our website for more information and see how we can help. Until next time, have a great day, everyone, and I will talk to you again very soon. Cheers.